everyone. So welcome again to our webinar today, Strategic Design for Engaged Online Learning. And without further ado, I am going to turn things over to Deborah Oldenburg, who is a Success Manager at Yellow Dig, to help get us started today. So the floor is all yours, Deborah.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. So hello, everyone. It's fun to see some familiar names in the chat, so thanks for attending. Welcome. Today, we're excited to share a special conversation with three of our stellar Yellow Dig users, instructional designers, who have really transformed their courses to spark that student-driven participation, that meaningful connection, and really just make teaching more manageable with connection as the foundation. So over the next hour, you're going to hear some stories that they have to share, strategies, practical tips, and by the end of our time, hopefully you can take away an idea or two to implement in your courses. So let's dive in, and we're going to get some introductions. As I was introduced already, I am the Senior Success Manager at Yellow Dig. I've been here about 3.5 years. We'll be close to 4. And before that, I was an instructor in the Masters of Education program for many, many years, then an instructional designer, then ed tech, and now I'm with Yellow Dig. So I'm excited to be here, excited for you to learn a little bit more about Yellow Dig and how it really is all about the design to engage those learners in your online environment. So let's do some intros. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is John Bellotti. I'm an instructional designer at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. I've been in higher education for 5 years. However, I've been an instructional designer for 25 or more years in anything that you can imagine, because I have my experience ranges from owning my own business to insurance to medical to dental to you name it. I've done it. E-learning online, in person. So a lot of experience in online education. Or different education, rather.
All right, Jill.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Jill Anderson. I work at NC State University as an instructional technologist, and I've been at NC State since 2007. And my first gig here was as an academic advisor for lots and lots of undergraduates. And then I moved into instructional design and instructional technology, instructional support in 2020. So right at a very exciting time for digital education. Yeah, so glad to be here.
Thanks, Jill. And Scott.
I'm Scott Standifer. I'm an instructional designer at Southern California University of Health Sciences, although I work remotely from the Chicago area. I've been in instructional design for about 25 years. And prior to that, I had degrees and work experience in graphic design and educational video production. Yeah, I've been using Yellow Dig or supporting it at our institution for a couple of years now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, let's get started. So with something many of us have experienced in online courses, students feel isolated, forms feel like writing assignments rather than discussions, faculty worry that they aren't engaging, and engagement can even drop off as the course continues. So with that in mind, we're going to talk to our panel about how they have approached designing courses and help instructors create courses to break through some of these challenges we see on the screen right now and actually foster that connection and participation. So, John, would you like to jump in?
Sure. You want to start with the students feel isolated? Is that where we're starting today?
Yeah, let's start with students feeling isolated.
Yeah, I think it's really important with Yellow Dig. We've found in particular that students can create a connection that they can't necessarily create in an online asynchronous course. So we actually had an instructor give us feedback to say, even, I know this kind of gets to our other one later, but we actually had an instructor kind of also say, hey, this is kind of like an in-classroom discussion, but there's no classroom. So that really built connections between students. But I think the really cool thing about that particular class was it was an accounting class. And this discussion went from, hey, here's the topic we're discussing today, to, hey, are you so and so and blah blah blah, and it went off to, you have a dog, and it just went completely off the rails. And I'm thinking, well, this isn't good. So I followed down this trail, and we found out that later on in the discussion, this student knew this other person at this other area. They talked about how they do accounting in that area, and then it like skyrocketed way off into way deeper in the topic than I ever would have thought. So here they created this connection that probably would have never occurred before if it wasn't a regular discussion board. So that really helps bring those connections together.
Nice. Thank you. Scott, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm going to jump a little bit to the instructors feel isolated part, because I think you're right about the students feeling isolated, but
Mhm.
we were getting, especially during the great transition of the pandemic, we were getting a lot of notes from the instructors about how do I get the students engaged? And when you really talk to them, a lot of them were feeling like they were missing the face-to-face interactions in the classroom, and they didn't know how to support that in their online lectures. And I think this addresses that. You know, I've heard it compared to being in the hallway after class, or being in the cafeteria or a coffee shop after class with the students and just talking, or being under a tree outside with the students and just talking. It's that freedom to let the conversation move around where it wants to, and the students don't feel like they're forced to sit and be quiet.
Yeah, I love that. The freedom of the conversation, because, as John said, sometimes that conversation takes maybe a different spin or a different avenue. But again, as you bring them back to that community building and learning community that Yellow Dig is all about, there's a place for those conversations as well. And Jill?
Yeah, the statement on this slide that really resonates with me, and I think resonates with what our instructors were feeling, is the one that says forums are writing assignments disguised as discussions. I think there was a lot of dissatisfaction with discussion forums, their capabilities, and really how they actually were manifesting themselves in courses. And I think really, like, sympathetically, I would say hosting an asynchronous conversation is not an easy thing to do, especially when you're sort of limited to, let me just ask a question to everyone. Like, that's not how natural conversations happen. And so many times the responses were writing assignments, and what ended up happening is it being a very laborious thing to grade the content of each of those and worry about, we don't normally sort of evaluate every utterance that a student has in class in the middle of a conversation, but we're sort of forced to do that in a discussion forum. And then, of course, a lot of the responses were, I agree, or I said the same thing in my post. And so they weren't conversations, and faculty were feeling really burdened by the grading and knew that they should provide a space for students to interact with one another, but didn't have an option that was really working in the way that they wanted it to. And so that is what led us to Yellow Dig, and we've been very happy with our faculty have been very happy with the results that they've been seeing.
Right, right. And it's amazing, even something as simple when you are designing with Yellow Dig, to talk about conversations more than even discussions. Because really, when they hear the word discussion, they do go back to discussion board, and there's like, where's my prompt? How many times do I need to reply? And as you all have found out, that's not the case with Yellow Dig. And so if you're trying to use it that way, you're really not getting the benefit that you could with the conversations that really focus on that social presence that we know that's so important in the learning process. So, good. So any other points on this slide or the next one that you
Uh,
would like to talk about?
yeah,
Yeah,
Deborah. So
anything? Yeah.
one of the things I the assignments disguised as discussions is I call them discussion boards, BORED,
Mhm.
instead of BOARD,
Yeah,
because they really are typically boring. They're writing assignments. There's something that AI can do pretty easily most times, and
yeah,
a lot of times in these discussion board things is you have to cite this, you have to cite that, whatever. In Yellow Dig, you just go in there, type your forward response if you want to, and say, here's a link to something else. And so there's this different sharing that's going on too. It's not just talking about a specific thing that every other student is saying exactly verbatim, practically from one to the next to the next. And as an instructor, you're going in there and not really gaining a connection to them, because this is essentially a writing assignment. With Yellow Dig, you're really kind of going in there and going, hey, here's a one word response, or 6 sentence response, and it's not cited or anything. It's legitimately a discussion. I didn't just cite everything that I just said in XX study. That's just not how discussions work, but that's how we utilize discussion boards typically. So Yellow Dig kind of takes that away from that. Students do polls and stuff. I've seen students do some really cool stuff in there, polling other students on what they thought of this advertisement or things like that. So it's just a really cool, more social way to engage.
Yeah, Deb, I had an example in one of our courses. So it's a health sciences school. So we have a course in diagnostic imaging, which is basically x-rays and MRIs and stuff.
Mhm.
And we had a student post in there that the previous semester, his mom had fallen and he'd heard a loud crack when she hit the floor. And she took him to the emergency, or he took her to the emergency room. And it was a pretty serious neck injury. But he had the MRI scans and he posted, like, this is what they showed, this is what my mom was going through.
Mhm.
And so, they got to use their emerging skills from the class to take a look at this guy's real world example. And somebody else in the class said, yeah, when my grandmother heard that I was taking this course, she said, oh, you got to show them the x-rays from my lumbar surgery. And they just started sharing
Yeah.
all these wonderful real world examples that you never would have gotten in a discussion board.
Right. Real world examples. Oh my gosh. And, so many students, whether they're undergrad or grad, especially we talk a lot about the grad students that are in the workforce from 8 to 5 or whatever the case may be. Right. So thank you. Very good. And some people are, for lack of a better word, married to their discussion questions, but maybe that's a quiz question. Maybe that's something to use in a paper or, something of that sort. But those discussion prompts are not a good place to be used in Yellow Dig. So, okay, let's look at our next slide, real redesigns, real impact. So, let's start by really just exploring how, I guess we could say, intentional course design really positions Yellow Dig as an important learning community, not a discussion board. So with that in mind, if you take a look, obviously, at this slide, kind of what is happening in that intentional course design before the use of Yellow Dig and then after Yellow Dig, or when you do use Yellow Dig. So hours lost, moderating, post once, reply twice, isolated learners, checking the box, limited insight, static participation, and counts. So we've already had a few examples of that. The one that Scott just brought up about the x-rays. And I do remember that community, Scott. That is, talk about a vibrant community with all the photos and conversations and connections, because loved ones or relatives and so forth have had some of those situations. So anything that you would like to add with reference to the after? Less grading, more guiding, talking a little bit about the instructor's role in Yellow Dig. And I think some of the key words are authentic connections and then real-time analytics. So would you like to, anyone like to jump in and kind of expand on this a little bit more?
I can jump in with this one, just because I thought of one particular faculty member who found himself very delighted and surprised at just how insightful his students were being in Yellow Dig that he had never seen before. And of course, we don't know, were they always that insightful and there was just no place for them to show it before? Or, or did the platform kind of spark some insight or give them the freedom to think in ways they hadn't done before? Or maybe it was a combination of the two. But I think that was it was very early on in our Yellow Dig adoption, but it was something that really stuck with me as being, really honestly improving relationships between faculty and students in many ways, where we may have previously been a little bit jaded by kind of what we thought was student level of engagement, and then realizing what capacity they had for making all these connections that we'd never seen before. So that was a real big before after impact that we found.
Thank you. When we talk about that student and faculty connection, the many, many years I taught, man, that was a lot of what got me up in the morning, right? Those connections with my students, which is invaluable. And again, like you said, not knowing if it wasn't that they had a platform to do that, but it did bring it out more with the use of Yellow Dig. Okay, anything else we'd like to add to this?
Yeah, Deborah. So one of the things that we noticed with one of our instructors actually, and myself even, was that the cool part about this was that it doesn't take a lot of time to post something. So it's a lot like, Facebook or any other social media site. You go in there, you post something. We had instructors say, "Hey, I was in a long line at the grocery store. I had nothing to do. Looked at my my posts in my Yellow Dig app, and I posted a reply to a couple of students. And me as myself, I actually did the same thing, posting it actually literally in line at the grocery store. So it didn't take a ton of time. And
Mhm.
for me, I just finished a certificate program with the traditional discussion board, and I never knew where I was. Like I had to go back into that. Like I was often the first poster, so I posted and then I forgot about it because I'm like, what else am I gonna do, right? I'm not gonna go there and check every day. And then by the time the assignment was due, I'm like, oh no, I had to go in there and I didn't do replies to two other people and so on and so forth. Yellow Dig, I just go in there I can go in there whenever I want. I can go in there on Tuesday. I can go in there at midnight on a Wednesday night. I can go in there whenever and just post. And I know exactly where I was in points every single time because it shows me every single time when I'm in there where I'm at in points. So it didn't take a lot of time for the instructor standpoint, nor did it take a lot of time from my standpoint as a student for that type of activity either. So really cool way to do that. And another thing on here, real-time analytics. I can see all those. I can see when students are posting, I can see how much they're posting, what they're posting about. Just a lot of cool stuff to be able to track and monitor if you want to. Otherwise, if you don't want to, that's fine too. You just get in there
Mhm.
5 minutes a day and you're out. And
Yeah,
you can let it grow organically or you can be a lot more involved. It's up to you.
yeah, yeah.
I,
And oh, go ahead, Scott. Yeah.
well, I'm going to call out the real-time analytics too. That
Mhm.
was one of the things that first sold me on Yellow Dig because I was looking at it going, maybe, and then I saw
Mhm.
the analytics. And there's been a lot of research and there's some resources online about communities just outside of higher ed, just online communities and growth patterns and how you sustain growth. And I was always thinking, wow, this would be really cool to do in higher ed. And then I got in here and saw the analytics, and you can, spot who's participating, who isn't. And if from a high level, you can reach out, you can look in there and go, oh, they were participating for the first couple of weeks, but something happened. Let's find out.
Mhm.
Um, so you have these tools, and also you have tools in there that let you go, well, I got a lot of posts. Am I doing well or not? And it compares to other classes
Mhm.
in the Yellow Dig system. So you can get some health metrics and make some decisions about how it's going. Even if you're not reading every post and grading every post, you can manage the community.
Right, right. Because we do have so many instructional designers in our audience today, and we have three wonderful instructional designers on our panel, I want to make sure we focus too on you all working with instructors when they come to you saying, they'd like to use Yellow Dig. Where do I start? How do I think about it? How can I make sure I think about it early, whether it's them designing it, you're helping them design it together to ensure that it's not just an afterthought, right? That it really is a learning community. So let's talk a little bit about that, how you work with instructors with Yellow Dig, I guess, to make sure it does make that real impact.
Well, I'll start in I did a presentation and I talked about the learning curve wipeout, the part that the instructors just have trouble with. And a
Yeah.
lot of it is this difference between the discussion board and Yellow Dig. And I have to repeatedly remind them that, it's not a weakness of Yellow Dig, but it's a difference. You are not assessing performance in here. You are not getting any data on how well they hit the learning outcomes for the course. You're not doing that. You're getting a grade for regular substantive interaction. That's
Mhm.
what you're looking at, how well they're interacting. And it's great and has a halo effect onto the other assignments in the course, and it improves overall performance. But I get that, this was happening just yesterday. I was like, one of the instructors was going, well, how do I require some of the topics and let the other topics be optional? No, that's not how you're thinking about a discussion board. This is whatever the students want to do. And it's got to be thought of as that whole class discussion where you don't grade the students in the class on whether they were right or wrong in the conversation. You look at whether they participated.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
that's a big deal too, is a whole paradigm shift away from discussion boards. Like you have to have this question and you have to answer it. I think that paradigm shift is really tough because you want to control the learning experience. But we're dealing with adults who need to control somewhat of their own learning to some extent, because that's where they're really going to learn stuff. How is this relevant to me? And talking about things that are relevant to me and my career and my future related to this specific class. So I think preparing instructors is really about making sure that it's understanding that it's a paradigm shift, that they have to let go. They have to let the conversation happen. And so I actually present them with, some templates and stuff like, here are a few things, 1 word, 2 word, maybe 3 word topics, and then just go and just let them loose. Let them, the first week or two, it's going to be like they don't understand. They're so used to having every part of their learning directed. Yellow Dig takes that away and it's like, here, go. And they don't know what to do at first. And then by week 3, it's like they're all over it. Like, oh, I can just share an article. I can do this. I can do that. I can do a poll, and it starts to take off.
And I think that does leave us still with a role for discussion boards, because if you want to assess how well they can answer a particular question, if you want to assess how they're doing on an outcome for the course, then you need to put that in the discussion board to have that modality. But so a lot of times I'll go through what discussion board questions they've used previously in a course, and we'll talk about, are there some that you want to keep here? Let's look at the course map and how you're assessing, because Yellow Dig isn't going to help you with that part.
Mhm. Yeah, and when you go from, and I think this might be maybe this slide or the next one, aligning the Yellowwood community with course outcomes. And when we met earlier, we talked about the topic tags. And again, that session or that conversation that you have with your instructors, how does that look? And again, we know it's a mindset change. The learning curve is definitely there. Um, but could any of you share, would you like to share how that works when you start having that conversation of topic tags and having those course relevant topic tags to get those conversations? Anyone? Jill or John, Scott?
Sure. I can sort of talk about that. I really think that I really think that sort of what we ask when using Yellow Dig, what we're asking students to do is we're asking them to um, create a post in this sort of social media like environment. And most of the time we encourage them to tag their post with some sort of topic that the instructors created that's related to the course in most cases. And I think that the students oftentimes, because they haven't necessarily interacted in this kind of environment, and this goes to sort of the paradigm shift and a little bit of what they're used to, they're not always 100% sure what to do with that. So I think a lot of it is, modeling some things at the beginning and sort of explaining what that might look like. So I think sometimes students have been in a lot of sort of prescribed interactions a lot in courses, especially online courses. And so it's a matter, as John mentioned, of sort of like the instructor sort of releasing some control, and then also students understanding that they do have agency about that. So I think that's kind of one of the key pieces and really I think that's what in many ways makes for a valuable and really a universally designed experience, regardless of what you use, is giving students agency and welcoming their voice. But then, putting a few guardrails on that, in this case, in the form of these topic tags, to keep things a little bit within the scope of the class.
Thank you. Yeah. Jill, you had an analogy when we met earlier about the side conversation they're having with each other. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think I remember what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of imagined it being, and others have said this a little bit more in the a little bit earlier, talking about the sort of conversation under the tree or whatever. But I imagine this being a space where, imagine that you are teaching in a physical classroom in a synchronous course, and you happen to be maybe a few minutes late for lecture that day, and you walk in and your students are sort of there already, and they're talking about the course content, and you kind of happen in upon that. And that's kind of what this particular platform provides, and that I think is a really important thing for us to provide, is a way for students just to have those sort of spontaneous, really student generated conversations about things that don't require you to tell them to talk about it.
Right, great. And I also remember, let's see, I think it was Scott and John talking about the no replies to the AI post, and those were the orphaned
Yeah,
posts.
so
Yeah.
because of the statistics that we can get in Yellow Dig, we did find some students that are utilizing AI to just generate random answers to create a post. But they were pretty easy to spot because they were often orphan posts. So there's an orphan post piece. And so now the instructor can go in there and say, well, this person is obviously utilizing AI, and at least talk to them about it and start to have a conversation about it, and what an actual good post means and whatnot. They can take away points if they want to, but there were at least ways to address that. And oftentimes those AI generated posts, the student actually could have done a lot less work if they actually just did an original post, because they get points for people posting to their post. So if they would have just come up with something original in the first place, they could have gotten all their points by just coming up with something original. And I found students that are trying to game the system by often going in there and posting and posting and posting. The funny thing is the system ends up gaming them, because they're most of the time their posts are legitimate to the conversation, and they get way more points than they need because they have people that find interest in those posts, and then they reply, and then there's this fear of missing out because people are replying to my posts. So then they go in there and they make posts to their posts, and it just goes on, and it really is a snowball effect in a good way, oftentimes with these students. So
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy. We had an instructor that flagged a post, or you mentioned it to me, that the student was probably using AI because they were long and they were bulleted and they were kind of stiff. And he wasn't that upset about it. We talked about it, and it's like they're not really accomplishing anything because they don't get more points for having a longer post. And like he said, nobody's replying to it. So the AI just doesn't help.
Right, right. Yeah, conversations. You're not really thinking of using AI in a conversation. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I believe this is um, one that John is going to talk a little bit about.
what is that, Deb? I'm sorry.
Belen, you want to get to that? Go to the next slide. Work smarter, not harder. There we go. Good. So we're going to talk about ways to stay engaged with your students without adding extra work. John, this is shared, a slide that you shared with us. You've done a
Yeah.
lot of work at your university with feedback from students and instructors, and this is one. So take it away.
Yeah, so what we found is that we weren't really getting engagement on discussion boards the traditional discussion boards that we thought. We'd have the one traditional post, a reply, two replies maybe. So the maximum number of engagements we would get per student is somewhere between 1 and 3. And then they were done. From a student perspective, I totally get it. That's what I did. But when we had people involved in Yellow Dig, they would also reply a lot more often. These are actually, some of these are low numbers, the number of engagements per week, because some of them we had in the 17 to 20 engagements per week per student, which was incredible. And the other thing that we found was that when instructors were involved in this conversation, students were more involved in the conversation, which usually is we found was the opposite in a traditional discussion board. When the instructor got involved, the conversation ended because they were the authority. In Yellow Day, because it's of more casual nature, we found that the more the instructor was involved, the more, sometimes the more accolades they gave, there was a direct correlation to how much a student was involved versus an instructor was involved. So it was really cool to see when an instructor got involved, it actually made it more interesting to students because the instructor would go in there and ask maybe a rhetorical question, maybe a response back to them, which carried the conversation further and further and got more students involved. And they wanted to see what was going on and gain more information from that. So it was a really interesting experience to watch how that happened as well.
Right. And I think it was Jill that talked about, you talked to the instructors about getting their points, right? They earn points as well. And try to get as many points as you want the students to get, to have that connection. So anything else that we'd like to add here? Okay, we're good. So we'll move on.
Yeah, sorry, Deb. So before we move on, I wanted to hear a little bit about Jill and Scott also observation of how they seen that engagement has changed in online, conversations before and after Yali. I know that we have some comments in the chat that this has been more a commercial that an instructional conversation. So I just want people to understand why you decided to shift into the model of using Yalvik and what results you have seen that you can share that really worked for student engagement in online classes rather than what's happening before with discussion boards and with all the stuff that we have been talking about. So I don't know if you, Jill and Scott, and even you, John, you want to share your perspective in this so people can understand why we're shifting the webinar into this perspective.
I would love to. Balin, can you maybe, I lost my thread of thought there. Can you sort of repeat the question just so I make sure that I'm answering what you wanted to hear? I
For
apologize.
sure. So I just want you to share with people why you started the shifting of what happened before when you were planning on creating the online classes and what you see before with engagement and student engagement and what happens when you start using Yodlee and what was the shift that you saw in a before and after, conversational design and what you see and what your instructors are telling to you, that the results that they are sharing with you when you decided to do the change from discussion boards into Yaldi?
Yeah, and I think I would say that it hasn't always been because I wouldn't want to intimate that Yellow Dig is sort of like a replacement for a discussion board. It's really kind of a different tool altogether, and it's not a one-to-one sort of shift. But I think because the discussion board in many ways was the only sort of, everybody just had a hammer and that's all they had. And so they were always going to use the hammer, right? Regardless of whether that was the appropriate tool. So I think what I've definitely seen, and I don't know that I've necessarily always had this in the context of like, versus discussion boards, but a lot of like I said before, a lot of the ways that instructors are seeing students interact, that they at least were not providing students a way to do before, and they're really delighted by. One example is an instructor who found that students originally she was sort of not sure if this was a great thing or not because it was not something she'd ever seen before, but her students were talking with each other in Yellow Dig about like an exam, or like how did y'all do on the exam? What did you think of the exam? How did you study for the exam? Blah blah blah. And she originally was kind of like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this. But she really kind of moved to embracing it and realizing that students were really benefiting from learning how each other was preparing for exams, and they started sharing study notes, and there had never been a place for them to really do that before, at least not that she had seen. So I think there's been a lot of instructors who have, you know, obviously we could debate all day about all the circumstances and all the other things that might have happened, but who have seen have just really felt a lot more engagement and have been very delighted at what they've seen students do that they'd never really witnessed before. And they're seeing their students in purely asynchronous online classes interact with each other in a way that they never had before. So I think that's really significant.
We had a situation where an instructor came to me because she had been invited by the students to join into a chat that they had on a different platform. And they were having conversations in there that she hadn't known were going on. They weren't bad necessarily, but the students were building a community on a separate platform. And she was like, could we, integrate this into the course itself some way? And Yellow Dig kind of fit that. But I've also heard from other instructors that they've heard about these kinds of external group chats, and they often turn toxic, and students get really upset about, or get very wary of it. Where Yellow Dig has the instructor there keeping things between the guardrails. So you can talk about a lot of stuff, but someone is in charge, someone's going to step in.
Thank you. John, I don't know if you want to add something else.
I don't know. The biggest thing I think is that social learning component. No matter how you do it, I think is really important. Whether you're in a class or whatnot, you can carry the conversation outside of the classroom, and that social learning is super important. I mean, you see students come together after class to talk about what was talked about in class, right? Because they didn't understand what the professor was saying. Well, this gives them an opportunity to do that in an environment that is probably a little safer in some ways, because they have the time to think. So somebody like myself, I'm a slow processor. So you ask me a question, usually I need more time to think about it. So I have that time in an online version of a discussion. So if an instructor gets to a point within the class, we don't have any more time for discussion about this today, but let's take it online. Let's go talk about it in Yellow Day. Go get some points, and continue the conversation. So whether it's an online or in-person class, I think that social learning component is really important. And both Jill and Scott, both of you has just talked about that in a sense, that social learning component. And whether I didn't get the answer to question 4, like somebody help me, like I'm totally confused. And now you've got somebody reaching out to somebody else that explains it, and maybe you've got 5 people reaching out to explain it, and one of those explanations makes a lot of difference to that student. And I think that's what's really important, that social learning aspect of it.
Yeah, and I can remember when I taught, I remember, student explaining it to students sometimes made more sense to the student than an instructor. They had a different way of looking at it or explaining it. So that actually that social presence, is a win-win in that case as well. So, okay, moving on.
I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat regarding that they want to see how Yalvik looks and really works. So our friends here from Client Success, Ale and Vicky are going to share some images so you can see it in the chat. And beside that, if you want any more information, you can reach us. I'm going to share our email in the chat on the webinar, so we can continue with the webinar. That it's all back to you.
Okay, yes, I did see some of that, and please feel free to reach out and we can give you all the information you want to need in a demo. We're really excited to have 3 instructional designers that have been through the process with Yellow Dig continue to help their instructors. And, as you can tell from the conversation, has learned a lot through that process, and we thank you for sharing that for sure. So if you're giving advice to another instructional designer, that comes to you and say, hey, one of my instructors came to me. What's one thing you tell them to keep in mind? I know, John, when we had the conversation before, you talked about a mindset change. Scott, I think you talked about like topic setup. So what would you tell an instructional designer if they came to you wondering about Yellow Dig?
I think that's just, for me, that's really the biggest thing is really that mindset change, is really that paradigm shift from answering a question to talking about a topic and letting the discussion go. So it's like what happens in a classroom before you get there, but it's happening all the time in Yellow Dig. People are discussing stuff, they're sharing videos, they're doing this, they're doing that, but Yellow Dig is a version of that that's all course related. It doesn't have to be course related, but usually it is all course related because, like I said, I've seen conversations go way off track and then come way back on track and go way further than I thought about that they ever would. So having that mindset, that paradigm shift, that you do just need to let it go sometimes, give them the right topics to talk about in 1 or 2 word topic tags, and let them go.
Yeah, I like that. Trust the process.
Deb, could I take a minute and share a couple of slides that I have?
Oh, please do.
Okay, let's see.
This one is my favorite.
Well, not this one. The next one is
Oh
your
yeah, no,
favorite.
that's not my favorite.
So this is how I kind of envision a discussion board, as a sort of stair step of knowledge. And each week we're going to go through the steps. We're going to talk about the topic of the week, and everybody's going to be, respond to each other, and you're going to be graded on your response. And it's structured. At the end of the course, we end up at the top of the steps. Whereas Yellow Dig is a brambly hedge. Yellow Dig is going, you don't know where it's going. It's going to hit all sorts of interesting topics, and the students are going to drive it. And you're going to learn a lot about what's resonating with them or confusing them, how they're relating to each other and to the course. So I just, it's an organic, you don't know where it's going. We had an instructor contact us like, oh my gosh, the students are getting to the wrong topic sets. And I looked into it and I was like, how are they even getting to topics if you don't want them in there? And he said, well, they're answering the ones from the end of the course. Well, if they have something to say about it now, then let them talk. That's kind of how Yellow Dig works.
There you go. Yes, let them talk.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop this.
And I think I'll add one thing that I oftentimes have to sort of emphasize is that Yellow Dig is not an assessment tool, right? So I mentioned before that, with discussion posts, the feeling was that I need to evaluate potentially against a rubric, sort of every utterance a student makes, against some criteria. And you don't do that in Yellow Dig, and that's because it's not meant to be it's meant to be a learning activity, right? So it's a place where students, and I love that Brambly Hedge because I think learning is a messy activity, right? We make mistakes and we aren't punished for those mistakes in this kind of a setup where we can say something that's entirely off base and then someone else can come in and you can debate some things and you can sort of be put back on track, and it's sort of, there's no risk to sort of going out on a limb like that, to continue the botanical analogy. But I do think that, and I mentioned before that, it's not a one-to-one sort of replacement. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've had to talk about is that, you can't you can't change from having assessed a particular learning objective with a discussion forum to assessing it with Yellow Dig. Like you still need to maybe assess that learning objective in a different way, but Yellow Dig is going to help your students get there
Yes.
better, or
Yes.
at least it's going to help them to, I mean, it's a participation score, right? I mean, that's pretty much what it is. It's participation and engagement. And so many times, and I know that this is what Yellow Dig encourages, is the score is appropriately weighted for participation. We're not talking about 30% of a student's course grade, because we do have to assess whether they're meeting their learning objectives, but we also want to encourage them to engage in the ways that are going to help them to meet that, and then hopefully inspire them to learn more and give them those sort of overall sense of agency and curiosity and thinking skills, making connections, all that kind of stuff that we want them to get in a more global sense from their education. So, but that is sort of a different way of thinking about something that you're putting into your grade book than something that you are really evaluating against a set of criteria. So
Thank you, Jill. Yes, 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 and yes to all of that. That was great. Thank you. Okay, we have our any questions. I think our chat has been really busy. And as I mentioned before, if you have a specific question and would like to use the Q&A part to kind of separate it from all of the chat information, please feel free to do that.
And Deborah, I can answer one of the questions that's in the chat right now. One of
Perfect.
them is related to our students really looking for unmonitored interactions. And honestly, they are. At least what we found anyway, from our working non-traditional students, usually our MBA program, because that's where I work, is in the School of Business, is we do find that they want that interaction. They say some of the most valuable interactions they have are with other students because they've got that networking opportunity. The course I talked about earlier, that accounting course, I've seen that replicated in other stuff, finance courses and other stuff too. I just like that example because it was so funny to see them talk about dogs, and then they know somebody at works at some different place and whatever, and it came back. But they are really looking for that social interaction, people outside of their normal work environment, to see what's happening in other work environments. Are you having the same issues that we are? Is this really relatable to the real world? Because like I'm not an accountant, I'm an instructional designer. How does that even relate to what I do? Well, it does, and this is how. And so people bring these personal experiences in, and I think that's where the magic for that particular thing, that particular group happens. I don't see it quite as much as undergrad because they typically do see each other every day. But I do also think it's really important for them too to talk, to have a space to talk about class stuff that isn't so structured and organized as well. And that creates other connections outside of that classroom that they might not have even realized from each other before.
Right, thank you. Any other questions?
Please let us know if anyone wants us to open the mic so they can ask their questions. We can do that as well. So we are here just to respond to all your questions.
Yeah, I see one person has actually raised their hands to be allowed to come on mic. So Jamie, I'm going to turn on the mic for you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Jamie Davis. I'm actually an academic success coach at the University of Central Florida with the Rosen College of Hospitality Management. I also am an adjunct instructor with the Rosen College of Hospitality Management. So I teach social science courses more than like hard skills, that kind of thing. My question is, I prefer face-to-face courses because I like the interaction. I'm teaching my first online course this semester, and one of the questions I had asked was, what was the sweet spot as far as capacity in the community? And it was answered in the Q&A. But kind of to follow up on that, um, how are you seeing Yellow Dig used in other modalities of instruction? So are you using it in your mixed mode courses? Are you using it in your face-to-face courses as well? And then Any type of advice that you would give as far as, again, new instructor, this is my second time teaching a course, so very brand new to all of this. Um, in, in designing the community, how much do you set up prior to the start of the term or the course versus are you in there editing and not necessarily monitoring, but modifying anything as you move along throughout the semester?
Great question.
Yeah, good
Who
question.
would like to take that?
I'll take the second part. I had to answer the first part, but now I forgot the first part of the question. So I'll take the second part. I was so distracted by the good question at the end. So I think the main thing that we encourage in terms of modification is really just with the topic tags, right? So, and that's really the main thing you can sort of modify in terms of your setup throughout once the community is launched, because you don't want to go changing like point values for things, but the things that you can change are, you can always add a topic tag if you see that there's need for one. You can change whether a topic tag is active or inactive. You can decide that, yeah, I want this to remain active, but we've had enough introductions. So after week 3, we're no longer going to give you points for just sort of an introductory post or something like that. You can also add accolades as you see fit. So if you notice that someone is doing something that you think is impressive and you never had an accolade for, taking an academic risk or an intellectual risk, you could make one and then add that accolade. That being said, because of the data and the analytics that are available, there are sort of ways that you can gauge how the community is functioning midway through the semester, and you can make small tweaks, but usually that's more about how you're talking about Yellow Dig outside of the class. Are you talking about it in your weekly announcement so you're sort of emphasizing its importance? Could you increase or decrease your involvement in it? So it's not so much about the setup as it is about the integration, the sort of, importance you're sort of conveying about it and that kind of thing, but not really tweaking settings and that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
And
part
I
of
think the first part of the question was
Yeah.
about
modes.
multimodalities. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, we do have some courses. I'm sure John and Jill have that too, of face-to-face courses where Yellow Dig is a good complement. It's outside of the live time, the students get to lead the conversation. It can often inform the instructor about what's on their minds or give them good examples to talk about more in class. Does that
Yeah.
match for you guys?
Yeah, I actually have a class that I love the fact that they're using it in an in-person class because it's a student managed endowment fund. So they have like $1 million that they legitimately manage and buy and sell stocks. Well, as they're learning about more about specific stocks, ratios, things like that, you can see them talking about, well, we should buy this stock or we should buy that stock. This has a whatever ratio, this has that ratio, and so it informs the conversation before they get to the classroom, to do various aspects of trading and whatnot. So or learn more about trading. So it's kind of a really interesting way to utilize it in class, or outside of class for an in-person class. But then, like you said, it's really cool because instructors will have a topic and they'll explore what that topic was 5, 10, 15 minutes before class and go, oh, this is what you guys are talking about. We're going to talk about that in class and say why you're right, why you're wrong. Let's have a discussion about that and go on and from there. So I've seen it used in-person classes really effectively. I've seen it used in asynchronous and hybrid classes really effectively as well. So
Nice. And I know, Scott, for sure, you have some instructors in your PA rotation course. Is that correct? For the rotation, the students felt a
Right, it's
little
clinical
isolated.
rotation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
clinical
so
rotation. Yeah.
yeah, and we're still working out the mechanics on that. But the
Mhm.
students were asking the instructors. We've lost touch with each other because we're out in the field now, and we're in
Yeah.
these shorter rotations, and we're rotating through, and we're feeling really isolated. How can we keep in touch with each other? So we were able to build up a Yellow Dig community for them And we're still sort of exploring how you support that long term. But
Right.
it really, certainly the first part of their rotations, it really answered that question for them.
Yeah. So it is, as you
Um,
see, being used a little bit more outside of classes.
yeah. So we have another question from Alison Bowen. And she's saying, how do you help adult learners or students who have apathy towards learning? I love this question.
Hmm.
Who wants to answer it?
That's another
Got
entire webinar.
That is. I think that's going to be in the next webinar.
Yeah. It's an interesting question though, because I think
Yeah.
that, there's with any social media piece, there's a fear of missing out, the FOMO. And I think that's where people get involved in a discussion board. Like you didn't see what was going on, you didn't see what was going on, and so on and so forth. And then the instructor brings it into the conversation in an announcement if it's an asynchronous class. I see a lot of people are talking about this because whatever happened this past week. So I think there's that FOMO that helps kind of get people involved, that if they have an apathy for it, that does help with that because they do get involved with it because the fear of missing out. So I think that's a really interesting concept that kind of precipitates people participating in this type of activity.
Yeah. Yeah, I see a comment about not having to be right or wrong, but it develops some scholarly confidence in Yellow Dig. I thought that's an interesting word that I haven't heard that much, scholarly confidence. I like that. All right, we are at the top of the hour. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Scott, Jill, and John. We appreciate your knowledge, your wisdom, your insight, and we just appreciate you. So thanks again. And as we have said in the chat, I think a few times, if you'd like to reach out, please do so. They have shared some email addresses. I know some of you wanted more of a demo, but that can be done another time. And just if you want to follow up with that email address that was given to you, we'd appreciate that. Thanks again. And thanks to OLC for giving us this platform. We appreciate it and enjoy your day.